We're here at the NDTV World Summit, and I have with us the Brazilian Ambassador to India, Ambassador Nobrega. Thank you so much for taking out the time to join us, sir. My first question to you is, the theme of the summit is, of course, the India century, but, the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech as well that multilateralism is growing and multilateral groups such as BRICS are becoming crucial in the global order. And now we're seeing that the BRICS summit is coming up. How crucial do you think these groupings are becoming in terms of mediating peace at a time when we're seeing such global conflicts taking over the world?
I think that India's perception is quite similar to Brazil's perception in the sense that we have now such formidable challenges before us which affects the whole of humanity. Climate change, health, the possibility of new pandemics, food security, poverty is increasing, inequality is increasing. So in order to find solutions to these really overwhelming challenges, we need to be more inclusive in how we deal with these issues, because we need to have contributions and from the whole world, and also hear the plights and the needs of the whole world. So I think that these groups like BRICS, which is now has expanded, the G20, are groups where you build blocks of consensus, build blocks of dialogue. But for Brazil, the ultimate objective is the reform of the institutions of global governance, because these groups, they are very important, but they do not replace the UN.
You mentioned that the BRICS is expanded, and it's completely right. Now we saw that recently the BRICS Plus summit, and now the leaders are going to come together for the first time and have this big summit. In this moment, how crucial are these global forums, given the fact that other more established, not more established, but older forums such as the UN are at a stalemate when it comes to any sort of mediation or bringing both parties of both the Russia-Ukraine war or the conflict in the Middle East to bring the parties to the negotiation table. So in such a situation, do you think leaders of the global south, voices of the global south like India, Brazil, can work together to mediate peace?
I think so. I think it's the whole point of having these groupings, so like BRICS or like IPSA, which is a group composed of the three of the largest democracies of the South. I think these groupings, they build consensus among themselves, and they bring solutions. They bring new solutions which sometimes are not being discussed in the traditional fora.
Would you think like non-Western solutions even?
I don't know if I don't like to define like Western, non-Western, in order not to give the impression that we are anti-West. We are not anti-West. We are what we are, and we stand to give our contribution to the world. So I wouldn't say anti-West. We are non-West.
Non-West, yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Brazil is also hosting the G20. India passed the presidency on to Brazil last year. So, what can we expect? What are some of the focal points of the G20 summit this year?
Well, I think the results Brazil is reaping in its G20 presidency, which is nearing its end, by the way, in less than 1 month now, a little more. Our results build upon the results achieved by this very successful G20 presidency that you had. Basically, we are building on the idea of ensuring that the interests of developing countries are firmly dealt with on the agenda of the G20, of course, alongside the agenda of the Western countries. We are not saying that G20 is going to be only an emerging countries forum. And also, India has really contributed in terms of boosting the legitimacy of G20, because when you have the African group acceding to the group, it's a whole new group. You have to. So this is the second point. I think a third point is that India has been really promoting creative ways of finding financial solutions to address socio-economic issues and environmental issues, especially in the developing world. And I think, and fourth is, I think that India has been dealing with the G20, and Brazil also is building on that, with this untiring disposition to reach consensus, to bridge the bridge the differences. You see.
Right. You mentioned India's, innovative financial solutions. We've also seen a massive growth in digital public infrastructure, UPI and so on. Do you think Brazil is also looking at adopting similar technologies?
Well, we have already some of these technologies. What we don't have, what India has, and India is more advanced, is that you have a very well structured and encompassing digital government, or we connected to the digital financial system. Brazil has still to have this all-encompassing digital governance, but we have important success stories of digital governance from the early 2000s, which was what we called in Brazil Bolsa Família, this direct help to poor women, disadvantaged women who needed a small income in order to survive. And this was one example of early digital governance.
My one last question to you is that, recently we've seen Russian President Putin as well as the Russian, foreign minister say that India, Brazil, these are countries that deserve a permanent seat in the United, Nations Security Council, and that the UN itself needs reform. So how do you think, as, leading voices in the global South, India, Brazil can push this reform?
I think that we have been pushing on very example. We are part of the so-called G4, which is a UN-based, not UN-based, but it happens in New York. The meetings happen in New York of Japan, Germany, India, and Brazil, who are pushing for a reform of the Security Council, where we would become permanent. We shall become permanent members of the Security Council. I think other areas where we are fighting for having our rightful place, it's in the financial institutions, IMF, World Bank. So I think we have been fighting on various fronts when it comes to that.
Right. Just one last question. The fact that, Prime Minister also spoke about, how India is kind of leading the world in terms of climate change and working on innovative solutions towards climate change and moving towards renewable energy, green transition, and so on. So, as you mentioned, even a lot of these global financial institutions need reform and to include more of these global South voices. So, how crucial do you think, and how much of an impact do you think that will have on climate financing, which has become such an important issue in recent years when it comes to combating climate change and the impact of climate change?
Oh, I think that this is the big issue now, because of course we have had these COPs focusing on completing the so-called rule book of the Paris Agreement, but now it's high time, it's more than high time, it's overdue time to talk about finance, and we hope that the COP30 to be held in Brazil will really focus and address the issue of financing. And let me say something, I think that in your economic survey you published, I think the Ministry of Finance published, you have a chapter on environment. I think it's interesting the point that India raises the issue of adaptation, because adaptation now is a need. Look at these extreme weather events we have experienced in Brazil, horrible extreme weather events, but not only in Brazil. So the issue of adaptation has to be dealt with on its own right, not only mitigation in the next climate negotiations.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us at NDTV, and thank you so much for joining us at NDTV World Summit. Thank you.
आपसे मिलकर खुशी हुई.
आपसे मिलकर भी बहुत खुशी हुई.